follow me. Hello, Ayla here, and I am such an enormous fan of Steely Dan that I thought I would make a video about Steely Dan. Hope that's all right with you. Of course, you know, they wrote incredible pop and rock music with the amazing sophistication and color of jazz and blues influenced music. While they didn't do too many songs that were blatantly blues tunes, they do have a few songs that take kind of certain tropes of the blues and then totally subvert your expectations with incredible harmonic choices, which is another way of saying chord choices. And I will talk a little bit about theory, I'm so sorry, but I feel like I would be amiss to not mention that in a video about Steely Dan, because obviously they had a very educated, or theoretically educated, musically theoretically educated perspective when they wrote. But at the end of the day, you can still just follow along by looking at the chord charts and looking at what I'm playing. I'll talk through the chords I'm playing. Then of course, for anyone who's interested, I might sort of go a little more in depth into why they may have made those particular choices. So the first song I want to look at is the song Peg off of their incredible album, Asia. And this song is maybe the closest they came to writing a song with like a traditional 1-4-5 blues chord progression, but with some very interesting chord choices. I seen your picture, your name in lots of books. This is your big debut. It's like a dream come true. So won't you smile for the camera? I know they're gonna love it. So basically, we can break this up into, like I said earlier, a 1-4-5 chord progression, meaning we start with our 1, C, because we're in the key of C, for this part of the song at least. And then we go to our 4, which would be F, which we can find on the 8th fret of the A string, as well as many other places on the guitar, of course. But this is where we're going to be focusing for now, 8th fret of the A string. And then our 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is G in this case. And we can find that at the 10th fret of the A string. And that's important to note because we're going to take this one chord movement and just move it around to those various places as the chord progression goes on. And so you might be asking, what are we playing here? Well, we're starting with a major 7 chord, C major 7 in this case, because the root is here at the 3rd fret of the A string, and that's where you find C. So C major 7, barring with my first finger on the 3rd fret of all of the strings from the A string down. We can leave E out of it here. We don't need to play the E string. And then add your 3rd finger to the 5th fret of the D string. Add your middle finger to the 4th fret of the G string. Pinky on the 5th fret of the B string. This is a very classic voicing of a major 7 chord. And then if you're barring with your first finger, you should be getting that 3rd fret of the E string, high E string as well. And then we go to this chord. And what's interesting here is though we're starting the chord here on the 2nd fret of the A string, that's not actually the root note of the chord. Because if you listen to what the bass is doing in the song, I believe it was the great Chuck Rainey who played the bass part in this song. He starts by playing. And so while he starts by going from the 3rd fret to the 2nd fret, that's actually him just playing the major 3rd of what is actually the root, which is G. So this chord here, the real root is here at G. And so this is basically a G add 9 chord. And we have our first finger playing the 2nd fret of the A string, mute the D string. That is not a muted D string. That's not what you want. What you want is no sound. And then middle finger on the 2nd fret of the G string, third finger on the 3rd fret of the B string, and your pinky on the 3rd fret of the high E string. But again, what we have is you just go back and forth between these chords. And I was also playing this classic line here, because that's sort of what the bass is doing. But now what's going to happen is we're going to move to the 4 chord. So we're going to do that exact same chord movement, but now starting up at the 8th fret like we discussed before, because our 4 is F. And then you come back down to our 1 chord, and now you take this move up to G at the 10th fret, our 5 chord, and then back to 4, back to 1. And that's why Peg is a very crazy and great Steely Dan blues, unlike any other blues I've heard before. So this next Steely Dan blues is Black Friday, which is the opening track off of their album Katie Lied, which apparently they hated, at least the production part of that album. In hindsight, they said they did not like it. But I think it's a great record, and I think as far as opening tracks go, this is an incredible opening track. And it sort of starts with this blues riff in E that continues throughout all of the verses, and then the chorus gets crazy, as you'd expect in a Steely Dan song, and it sounds like this. Follow me. Yeah, so that really kick-ass and awesome blues riff is in E. This whole verse part of the song you could think of as being in E. What we start with is some movement on the A string, where we have the 2nd fret and maybe the open E string as well to sort of beef up the sound of it. And then 4th fret, 5th fret, back to the 4th fret, 2nd fret. And now the second half of this riff is like this. So we go back to 4th fret, 5th fret. And what this is 2nd fret G string, and then open G string with this sort of trill with your 1st finger on the 1st fret. And that's kind of a classic blues move for sure. Now we have the turnaround, which I guess you could probably think of as the chorus, which sounds something like, when Black Friday falls, you know it's gonna be here. Don't let it follow me. And it goes back into that riff there. And so what's happening there in terms of the chords? The first part, all these chords are kind of linked together with that note there, because they're the top part of all of these chords, which is why a lot of Steely Dan chords, even when they're doing some crazy modal interchange stuff that might sort of be jarring or a little out there for a music listener who hasn't spent a lot of time with maybe some more crazy jazz type music, the voice leading helps tie all these chords together because it gives them a commonality that makes them feel like they're all connected. And they are. So this first chord, I'm just playing your classic A major chord. You could play, classic A major bar chord like this, barring with your 1st finger. But the only caveat is you'd want to avoid the high E string, because like I said, we want the top note to be that 5th fret of the B string. So you could bar and put your 3rd finger on the 7th fret of the A string, pinky on the 7th fret of the D string, and then your middle finger on the 6th fret of the G string. However, I prefer playing my major chords Hendrix style with your thumb covering the root there. In this song in particular, it makes it super easy to play the next chord, which is a G6 chord. So you just take this shape, move it down a whole step to G, add your pinky to the 5th fret of the B string, because that's where you're adding the 6 to this chord. That's why it's called a G6 chord. And That's also the voice leading commonality between those chords. And then we play an F sharp dominant 7 chord, which is just your classic dominant 7 shape. Root is at the 2nd fret of the E string, so you're barring with your first finger across all of the strings at the 2nd fret. Then your 3rd finger is at the 4th fret of the A string. Your middle finger is at the 3rd fret of the G string, and then your pinky is at the 5th fret of the B string there. And this is just putting the dominant 7 up at the top of the chord, which makes it a little bit crunchier. If you were to play this whole chord, it creates some really nice crunchiness between the B string and E string. However, as I've said, that was a test to make sure that you heard the first part, which is the voice leading is here on the B string. So we don't want to play the E string at all. So that's also why it's especially important to add the pinky there, because that's, again, playing that important voice leading note. And then back to G6. And then we have, and that's probably my favorite part. And what's happening here is we're playing an E flat minor 7 chord. So just barring across the 6th fret of the A string and all of the strings below it. Then add your 3rd finger to the 8th fret of the D string, middle finger to the 7th fret of the B string. There's your minor 7 chord. That's a very classic minor 7 chord shape. You may have encountered it before. But then what we have is, right here, you could think of it as being an A over D chord, meaning we have an A major triad with D in the bass. So you'd see it written as A/D. And you might actually be able to recognize, for example, in that Hendrix chord, what you're playing on the D, G, and B strings, they're in this chord as well, except now we're putting the root here on D, which we can find at the 5th fret of the A string. But what's interesting about this chord is it actually also is a D major 9, if you consider D as the root, which it is. So those are 2 different ways you could refer to it. And Steely Dan, they are famous, I think, for their amazing slash chords. And this is definitely one you see in a lot of their music. And we'll see it in some of the other stuff we look at later in this lesson. Bar with your first finger across the 5th fret of all of the strings from the A string down. And then add your 3rd finger to the 7th fret of the D string. And then add your middle finger to the 6th fret of the G string. And it's quite similar to that last chord, the minor 7, but it's just your middle finger that hops down a string to the G string. And of course, the chord moves to a new root. But that's what we have so far. And then one more wonderful slash chord where we have an A triad over B. And so what this actually creates is a B9 sus4 chord, which is also used a lot by Stevie Wonder. And so you might recognize that this is acting as the 5 chord, bringing us back to our 1 in E, because of course at this point we come smashing back into the verse part of the song with that amazing blues riff. But that's why this chord makes sense in this context. And the way you play it is you'd have your 3rd finger covering the 7th fret of the E string. As always, mute the A string. The A string is just getting absolutely left out today. We are not using the A string. And then we're putting our pinky on the 7th fret of the D string. Middle finger is on the 6th fret of the G string. And then your first finger can be on the 5th fret of the B string. It wouldn't be incorrect to sometimes bar with your first finger and also get the high E string in there. But in this case, that's not really the voice leading we're looking for, because you hear So the next song we're going to be looking at is another opening track from another one of their albums. Asia is the album that I'm referring to. And the opening track is Black Cow, which is, again, I can't even express how good of a song it is. It's just absolutely amazing. saw your face on the counter by your keys. Was a book of numbers and your remedies. One of these surely will screen out the sorrow. Where are you tomorrow? All right, so let's break down what I was doing there. Firstly, the blues motif. And this is classic. You instantly think of old school blues when you hear this, or at least I do. I'd imagine there's at least 4 other people out there who would feel the same way as me. And so what I'm doing is I'm playing this dyad, as they call it. Dyad meaning it has 2 notes, because if a triad has 3 notes, a dyad has 2. And so I'm playing middle finger on the 8th fret of the G string, and then 3rd finger on the 8th fret of the B string. I'm moving that shape from the 8th fret to the 10th fret and back. And you might have heard me doing that little thing there with my thumb on the 8th fret of the low E string, because that's the root note. That's not actually in the guitar part. I was just filling in the space, sort of in what the bass player might be doing in terms of the groove, but not quite. It's not quite that, but I just like filling the space that way. That kind of stuff. Can be a nice little addition if you're playing this on your own, or you could do your own thing and I'm sure it would be awesome. But basically you take this shape and then you move it up again and play the 8th fret of the high E string and bring it back down. And this is also a great shape to use anytime you're playing a blues. Now, if we look at the turnaround, that's where things get a little crazier. I keep saying the word crazy because I don't know how else to explain it. It's just, every time I hear it, it's just this all-encompassing, soul-enveloping hug from Steely Dan. And it's amazing. And so, what's happening is, that's the first move in the turnaround. So this is an A7 sharp 9, A altered chord. And I'm playing the root with my thumb on the 5th fret of the E string, muting the A string. We shouldn't be surprised at this point. And then our first finger playing the 5th fret of the D string. Our middle finger is playing the 6th fret of the G string, and then 3rd finger is playing the 6th fret of the B string. And this is a correction to put into where I was naming it before. This is an A7 sharp 5 chord, an A7 augmented chord. And the reason for that is because we have the sharp 5 in this chord. And that helps build a lot of tension for us to resolve to this wonderful chord right here, which has the C major triad in it over a D chord. And you could also think of this as being a D9 sus4 chord. It's another way of playing that chord that we looked at earlier in Black Friday. And it's just, like I said, different voicing with the root on the A string now. And it's even easier to play because, as you see, I'm just barring with my first finger across the 5th fret of all of the strings from the A string down. Super easy. You can get the high E string in there as well. However, I believe, if I remember correctly in this song, you hear that as a sort of note coming through in what the backup vocals are doing and maybe what the keys are doing at that point in the song. Though if I'm wrong, please correct me. This could be a great ear training exercise for you to investigate. And please, if I'm wrong, leave terrible, mean comments about it. So the next chord, Hendrix chord. Here we go, the dominant 7 sharp 9 chord. So another altered dominant chord. And the reason it's called the Hendrix chord is you might recognize it from pretty much all of the Hendrix songs that I've heard. That's not true. It's used in quite a few though, like Purple Haze most notably. And it's obviously a major staple of Jimi Hendrix's playing. But I'm sorry, let's get back to Steely Dan. This is, of course, a great altered chord to use in jazz influenced music, perhaps. And I'm playing the root here with my middle finger on the 7th fret of the A string, because that's our root, of course. It's E. And then first finger on the 6th fret of the D string. And then there's the 3rd finger on the 7th fret of the G string, and then pinky on the 8th fret of the B string. That's our sharp 9. And the reason this chord is really wonderfully crunchy is, of course, dissonance there between the major 3rd and the sharp 9. Because the sharp 9 is the same thing as taking a 2nd and raising it by 1. So therefore, it is only a semitone away from a 3rd, a major 3rd. And again, great dissonance to resolve to this chord here. And again, this is the chord we already looked at. It's that, major 9 chord. Or it could be thought of as B flat over E flat, because there's our B flat triad over E flat. And again, I don't know for sure if the E string is in there for voice leading. You might want to leave it out, because then you get, and I believe that's what's going on. But it's not necessarily wrong to leave the high E string in there as well. But at that point, we come back to that bluesy motif. And so, again, what we'd have is, yeah, so what it sounds like when you put this all together, again, you have, and we're back to the blues motif. There's one other chord to look at, and that is when the second time this turnaround comes in, because you may have heard I played it twice. This is the second time it comes in the verse, and this is right before we get to the chorus. The one other chord is this chord right here. And again, this is that wonderful D9, or in this case, E9 sus4 chord that leads us into the chorus. Because the chorus is in A major, so of course this is a great 5 chord to resolve to A major. And again, the root here is E, which is the 5 of A. So that was Black Cow. Let's move on to our last song. And this is another opening track off of their second album, Countdown to Ecstasy, which is, again, one of my favorite Steely Dan albums. Again, this opening track is unbelievable, and it was actually the first Steely Dan song I ever heard in Rock Band 2. Shine in your Japan, sparkle in your China, yes, I'll be there, Bodhisattva, Bodhisattva. Won't you take me by the hand, Bodhisattva, won't you take me by the hand, and I'll be there, shine in your Japan, sparkle in your China, yes, I'll be there, Bodhisattva, Bodhisattva. As you might have heard, the start of this is quite a traditional kind of rock blues riff that starts on the 1 and then goes to the 4. And so the way you play it, you start on the root, which is G, at the 3rd fret of the E string. Then you slide from the 5th fret to the 7th fret of the E string. And then 5th fret, 7th fret on the A string. Now you do the same thing on the next set of strings, starting on the A string 3rd fret. Because that's us moving from the 1 to the 4, and then you move back to the 1 for the incredible turnaround. But one thing to note is in the latter half of the song, you start hearing stuff like, and that's just coming up to G all the way up here on the 10th fret of the A string and playing that classic voicing of a dominant 7 chord, where you have your 3rd finger covering the 10th fret of the A string, and then middle finger covering the 9th fret of the D string. And then you have your pinky covering the 10th fret of the G string, and then here's your first finger up at the 8th fret of the B string. And there's some nice crunchiness there, and this is obviously a great voicing. But now the turnaround, what we've got going on here. This is a slightly reharmonized minor 2-5-1, because instead of just playing classic minor 7 flat 5 as your 2 chord, because we're trying to get to D, so you'd normally want to play an E minor 7 flat 5, but you can reharmonize minor 7 flat 5 chords as major 7 chords with the root 1 lower than where it normally would be. Because you'll notice that the top half of this chord is the same. So this is just a really cool way to achieve some tritone action there, as I like to call it. I think the tritone always makes for a very interesting addition to any chord progression or anything that you're doing, for the most part, in the right context. But yeah, so we have an E flat major 7, and this is the same chord voicing we looked at earlier in the video, to this A7 altered, A7 sharp 5, literally the exact same chord we looked at earlier in Black Cow, resolving to a D minor 7, and I'm playing a very typical voicing of a D minor 7, barring across the 5th fret. All of the strings, again, from the 5th fret downwards, A string downwards, and then your 3rd finger on the 7th fret of the D string, and then your middle finger on the 6th fret of the B string. So far we have, and then an F6. This is the same chord voicing we looked at earlier in the video as well. But now our root is F here at the 1st fret of the E string. And then you come back to that E flat major 7, and then F6, G. So you have, and that's a really classic chord progression. And you could consider it a type of modal interchange. Aeolian, we're borrowing from Aeolian to get this, E flat major 7 to F6. You can also just think of it as moving up by whole tones like that. It's a lot simpler to think of it that way for sure. And this is obviously a very classic cadence that you hear in a lot of rock music. The Beatles used it a whole bunch. Obviously Steely Dan. I've used it myself. Not necessarily saying it was great, but I've used it many times because it's a great cadence to use. And so what this sounds like all together. And then you're back to your riff. And one thing I wanted to note, the last thing to note, is those who love Steely Dan might know that in the song, what the guitar actually does in the breakdown is sort of outline, individual notes. However, I thought it would be really valuable to look at the actual harmonic movement in that part of the song in terms of the chords that you could play. And then if you're interested in figuring out how to play that other riffage in that part of the song, I think you'd have a lot of fun, maybe doing it by ear. I'm not sure if there are any tabs out there that are completely accurate. I think some of the tabs I've seen themselves say, I don't think this is right at all. So maybe you could be the person to put the tab out there for everyone. And if you do happen to have a tab on it and it is correct, then I'm sorry I said this. You're doing a great job. And anyways, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope that you learned something from this video, or at the very least, have a great day from here on out. So thanks so much. Peace out. Goodbye.